Don't come to our anniversary party tonight. There will only be high society guests, and we need the optics to be perfect. I read my daughter Harper's text twice. There were no tears, no lump in my throat. At 65, I've learned you don't beg for respect. I locked my phone screen, set it on the oak table, and sank my hands back into the wet clay. My name is Veronica Lujan. For the last 4 decades, I've worked restoring antique ceramics and creating traditional pottery. My late husband and I bought this property, a rambling, historic stone farmhouse, with a massive central garden and a huge carriage house studio in the back when it was nothing but ruins. We rebuilt it stone by stone. But 2 years ago, Harper and her husband, Vance, asked to stay in the main house, just for a few months, while they saved up for a place of their own. Those months turned into years, and the dynamic slowly shifted. Vance started dictating the decor, boxing up my vases in the basement because they clashed with his modern, minimalist aesthetic. Harper asked me to stay out of the garden when partners from Vance's investment firm came over, hinting that my clay-stained work clothes gave a bad impression. Instead of arguing, I got practical. I moved permanently into the studio apartment, a bright, spacious loft at the back of the property. I stopped cooking for them and cleaning up their messes. If they wanted to play house, they could take on the chores. But this text was different. This was a line crossed with absolute audacity. Outside, I could hear the catering trucks pulling into my driveway. They were unloading French-style bistro chairs and crates of crystal glassware. I smiled faintly, wiped my hands on a damp rag, and walked over to the filing cabinet where I keep my important papers. If tonight was going to be an exclusive affair, I was going to make sure the house rules were crystal clear before the sun went down. Vance always had a habit of treating what was mine as his. The week before the party, I'd overheard him in the garden bragging to a buddy about his new estate, pointing out the reclaimed mahogany beams I had personally sanded and treated 20 years ago. Harper just stood next to him, nodding along like it was gospel truth. That same afternoon, I started getting my affairs in order. I didn't need lawyers or endless screaming matches. I just needed boundaries. I logged into my bank account and checked my auto-pay settings for the property electricity, water, and landscaping. With a few clicks, I canceled the automatic withdrawals. Starting next month, the bills would be delivered right to the front door of the main house, addressed to Mr. Vance. While I was sorting through receipts, the mail arrived. Tucked inside was a thick envelope with the seal of the American Craft Council. I opened it carefully. The letter, signed by the board director, confirmed that my ceramic collection had been selected for the main museum's permanent exhibit, and I was being awarded the National Lifetime Achievement Award in Craft. The official ceremony would be broadcast over the weekend, but the press release was going out today, the exact date of my daughter's anniversary. I folded the letter and tucked it into my desk drawer. I didn't breathe a word of it to Harper. The last time I tried to share a milestone. Vance literally yawned and called my pottery a cute hobby for widows. I walked over to the main house. The front door was propped open for the decorators. I headed straight for the dining room, opened the large wooden credenza, and pulled out my antique silver platters and fine bone china. Harper appeared in the hallway, frowning. "Mom, what are you doing? I need those platters for the hors d'oeuvres tonight," she said, crossing her arms. "They're mine, Harper," I replied calmly, packing the pieces into a box. "And tonight, they'll be in my studio. Use the ones you guys bought, but ours are just everyday plates. Vance's guests will notice," she protested. "That sounds like a you problem," I said, walking right past her without breaking my stride. I left her standing in the hallway, grasping for a comeback that never came. The late afternoon sun cast a heavy, golden glow over the garden. From my studio window, I watched the main house transform. String lights had been draped through the oak trees, and a string quartet was tuning their instruments on the patio. Women arrived in silk cocktail dresses, men in tailored suits. Harper drifted through the crowd with a champagne flute in hand, smiling and playing the perfect hostess in a house she didn't own. Vance kept checking the driveway. I knew his firm's managing partner and several high-roller investors were on the guest list. At exactly 7 p.m., I got a second text from Harper. Please make sure your studio door stays locked. Vance doesn't want people confusing that area with the guest bathrooms. I tossed my phone on the counter and didn't bother replying. Instead, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, turned on the classical music station, and sat down to review sketches for my next piece. I decided to lean into the solitude. I didn't feel left out. I felt sheltered from the hypocrisy flooding my own backyard. By 8 o'clock, the party was in full swing. The clinking of glasses and laughter drifted through the air. I just watched quietly, sipping my tea. I knew that right around this time, the national arts and culture feeds were dropping their special bulletins. I turned off the main studio lights, leaving only a reading lamp on, and settled into my armchair. The peace in my space was a sharp contrast to the spectacle happening 50 feet away. I wasn't in a rush. The truth, much like good clay, takes time to set, but once it cures, it's virtually unbreakable. At 8:15 p.m., the phone on my desk started to buzz. Harper's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Why did you hide this from us?" she demanded the second I answered. Her voice was shaking, all that polished hostess composure completely gone. In the background, the hum of the party sounded tense, almost muted. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Harper," I replied, casually turning a page in my sketchbook. "We just saw the news." She practically gasped. Someone at the party was scrolling on their phone and saw the announcement from the Arts Council. "Mom, your name, your picture in the studio. It's everywhere. They're calling you one of the country's most significant master ceramists. Why didn't you tell us? You never asked what I was working on," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Besides, I recall my work being just a cute hobby for widows. A heavy silence fell over the line. I could picture Vance's face, probably beet red, realizing that the woman they'd hidden in the backyard was now the center of attention in the country's most elite cultural circles. "Mom, Mrs. Sterling is here," Harper whispered, raw panic bleeding into her voice. "She's the primary investor Vance has been trying to land for months. She just asked to make a toast to you. She's asking us where you are. Tell her I'm right where you told me to be." I answered, "Please. You have to come to the main house. Vance looks like a complete idiot trying to explain why you aren't at our anniversary. You explicitly texted me not to attend because it was high society only. I'm just respecting your boundaries." "Harper," I hung up before she could say another word. I stood up, smoothed out my linen skirt, and walked over to the hallway mirror. I pinned my gray hair into a neat French twist and put on the silver earrings my husband gave me 30 years ago. The night was just getting started. Through the studio windows, I saw the exact moment the party's vibe shattered. Mrs. Sterling, a formidable woman known as much for her massive wealth as her influence in the art world, stood dead center in the garden. The guests who had been hanging on Vance's every word were now formed in a quiet circle around her. Mrs. Sterling hadn't come for an anniversary. She'd come because she recognized the address. I unlocked my studio door and walked down the flagstone path toward the main garden. I didn't rush. My steps were measured. A few guests frowned as they saw me emerging from what they'd been told was a closed-off maintenance area. The moment I stepped into the lantern light, Mrs. Sterling recognized me. She completely ignored Vance, who was stammering and trying to hand her another glass of champagne, and made a beeline for me with her arms wide open. "Ah, Veronica, what a master you are," she said, her clear voice ringing out over the patio. "It is such an honor to be in your home. When I saw the news alert, I knew I had to come congratulate you in person. Your restoration work is the absolute soul of our upcoming exhibit." Every eye in the garden darted from Mrs. Sterling to me, then back to Harper and Vance. My daughter looked ghostly pale, clutching her designer bag like a life preserver. Vance swallowed hard, totally incapable of forming a coherent sentence. "The honor is all mine, Mrs. Sterling," I replied, returning her embrace. "Welcome to my home." I emphasized those last two words just enough. I caught a couple of Vance's colleagues exchanging confused glances. "Your home?" asked one of the guests, an architect who had been praising Vance's taste all evening. "Vance told us he designed the renovations here." I smiled, locking eyes with my son-in-law. Vance immediately looked down at his Italian loafers. "Vance has quite an active imagination," I said breezily, not breaking eye contact with him. But no, I handled the restoration myself over the course of 10 years. Those beams you were admiring were salvaged from a ruined 19th century mill. And I fired the patio tiles myself right here in my studio. A murmur rippled through the garden. Mrs. Sterling nodded, utterly fascinated, stepping closer to examine one of the porch columns. "You can absolutely see the hand of a true artist. This house is magnificent," she remarked, before turning to Harper. "You must be incredibly proud of your mother. It's odd we haven't seen her all evening. When I asked your husband earlier, he mentioned you were out of town." Harper opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was paralyzed, caught in her own lie in front of the very people she was desperate to impress. "I wasn't out of town," I chimed in, my voice pleasant but firm. "I was working in my studio. Harper and Vance preferred this party to be exclusive to their social circle, so I decided not to intrude." There was no bitterness in my tone, no dramatic flair. I just laid the facts on the table. The raw truth was more than enough to shatter their high society facade. The guests instantly put the pieces together. The supposed owners of the estate had hidden the real owner away because they were ashamed of her. The architect who had been buttering Vance up quietly set his drink down on a side table. "How curious," he muttered, visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling, sharp as a tack, read the room perfectly. Well, Veronica, I would absolutely love to see your studio, if you'll allow me. I've heard wonders about the kiln you built." "Of course," I replied. I turned around and started back down the flagstone path. "Right this way." Mrs. Sterling followed me without hesitation, trailed by 3 or 4 other guests who suddenly found my pottery far more fascinating than an anniversary party. I left my daughter and her husband behind in dead silence, surrounded by people who were now looking at them with a mix of pity and absolute disdain. My studio was warm, carrying the familiar sense of damp earth and glaze. I flipped on the overhead lights, illuminating rows of shelving filled with tall vases, hand-painted platters, and half-restored antique ceramics. The guests who had followed Mrs. Sterling fell silent, taking in the true heartbeat of the property. Mrs. Sterling paused in front of a long-necked vase with intricate blue detailing. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, tracing the rim. "How long does a piece like this take?" "About 3 weeks," I replied, pouring more tea. "It's a process you simply can't rush." As we were discussing firing techniques, Vance appeared in the studio doorway. He looked desperate. He needed to salvage his image in front of Mrs. Sterling and his firm's partners. He walked in, forcing a stiff, practiced smile. "Mom, what an amazing surprise about the award," Vance said, trying to sound casual as he sidled up next to me. "Mrs. Sterling, Veronica is the pride of our family. We've always supported her little business venture." I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lose my cool. I simply turned back to Mrs. Sterling and said, "Vance is too kind. Though just last month he asked me to move these pieces into the tool shed because they made the house look dated." A couple of guests awkwardly stifled a laugh. Vance stiffened, his fake smile froze in place, and his eyes flashed with genuine panic. "The tool shed, Mrs. Sterling asked, arching a single, judging eyebrow at Vance. "I suppose financial whizzes don't always have an eye for cultural heritage." It was a subtle remark, but a lethal one. Vance had absolutely no comeback. He took a step back, mumbled an excuse about checking on the catering, and bolted from the studio. His humiliation didn't come from me attacking him. It came from simply holding up a mirror to his own actions. The truth didn't need any dressing up to ruin him. The next morning, the estate was eerily quiet. The lawn was littered with plastic cups and crumpled napkins, the hangover of last night's disaster. The guests had bailed early, and the string quartet had packed up long before midnight, at 9 a.m. sharp. I walked out of my studio with a manila folder. I let myself into the main house. Harper and Vance were sitting at the kitchen island, nursing black coffee, looking like they hadn't slept a wink. When Harper saw me, she jumped up. "Mom, about last night," she started, her voice aiming for apologetic but landing on panicked. "It was a total misunderstanding. That text. We were just so stressed with the party planning." I dropped the folder onto the marble island. I didn't return her smile. "There's nothing to explain. Harper, I understood the message perfectly," I said, sliding a document across the counter toward them. "This is a lease agreement. I've already spoken with my CPA. Starting the 1st of next month, if you decide to stay in this house, you will be paying fair market rent." Vance nearly choked on his coffee. "Rent. This is a family home. You let us stay here to save up money. I let you stay for 2 years. And in return, you told me to hide in my own backyard and pretended I didn't exist to your friends," I said calmly, folding my hands in front of me. "I am no longer your hostess, and I am certainly not your maid. I am the landlord. You can't just spring this on us out of nowhere," Vance yelled, standing up. "We don't have $4,500 a month budgeted for rent." I tapped the bottom of the page. "If the terms don't work for you, you have 30 days to vacate the property. The choice is entirely yours." Harper stared at the paper, tears welling up in her eyes not out of sadness, but from the sheer frustration of realizing they held absolutely no power. This is insane! Veronica!" Vance said, raising his voice and stepping toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "We're family. You can't kick us out over a simple misunderstanding at a party." I stood my ground, looking him dead in the eye without backing up a single inch. "Family respects one another, Vance. You two just took advantage," I said softly. "And I'm not kicking you out. I'm offering you options. You get to choose." I held out my hand. "The keys to the utility room and the main gate, please. You no longer need access to those areas. What, I'm not giving you my keys?" He scoffed, crossing his arms like a petulant teenager. "Fine." I sighed, pulling my cell phone out of my pocket. "I swapped the padlocks on the main gate yesterday. If you don't hand over the house keys, I'll have the locksmith out here by noon to rekey every door in this house, too. I'll just add the invoice to your first month's rent." Vance stared at me in disbelief, looking at Harper for backup, but my daughter was dead silent. reading the clauses in the lease that stipulated they were now responsible for all utility and maintenance bills. Financial reality had finally hit them like a freight train. "Just give them to her, Vance," Harper mumbled, rubbing her temples. "Just give them to her." Reluctantly, he pulled out his key ring, wrestled the 3 keys off, and slammed them onto the granite counter. I calmly picked them up and dropped them into my pocket. "You have until the end of the week to give me an answer on the lease," I said, turning to leave the kitchen. "By the way, last month's electric bill is on the living room table. It's due tomorrow. Make sure you pay it." I walked back to my studio, the morning air feeling remarkably lighter. I had taken back my house without raising my voice once. It didn't even take 10 days before the first moving truck backed into the driveway. Harper and Vance couldn't afford a $4,500 a month rental, much less maintain the flashy lifestyle they loved to project, without me silently subsidizing their living expenses. They ended up renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment downtown. The day they handed over the house, Harper stood on the porch holding a cardboard box. She looked at me, maybe expecting a hug or some tearful change of heart. "If you change your mind, we could come up for visits on the weekends," she said, a final, desperate attempt to hold on to her status. "Let me know in advance if you want to visit. My schedule is quite packed these days," I answered politely, accepting the main house key from her hand. There was no drama, no fake apologies. She gave a defeated nod and climbed into Vance's car. I watched them pull out onto the gravel road, and then I locked the front gate. That same afternoon, I threw open every single window in the main house. I let the crisp breeze sweep out the smell of expensive cologne and stagnant energy they had left behind. I hauled my vases out of the basement and placed them in the foyer, right where they belonged. My bone china went back into the dining room hutch. I walked down the hallway, the heavy ring of keys in my pocket, the afternoon sun highlighting the very tiles I had crafted with my own hands. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely silence. It was a deeply peaceful one. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the director of an international gallery looking to feature my work after the award announcement. I answered with a smile. "Yes. This is Veronica," I said, looking out over my blooming garden. I had left the years of letting myself be invisible behind. I was exactly where I belonged in my own home, the absolute master of my life and my art. Sometimes, defending your place in the world doesn't require screaming matches, dramatic showdowns, or massive confrontations. The greatest act of dignity is silence backed by clear, practical action. When we stop begging for the respect that should be freely given and simply withdraw our support from those who take us for granted, we take our power back. Setting boundaries isn't about revenge or punishment. It's an act of profound self-love. It's a reminder that our worth doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. It's found in the absolute peace we feel when we finally lock the door to our own home at the end of the day.